Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Julia McPherson. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Operations at Jesuit Refugee Service, USA. Today, we'll be discussing the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on school-aged refugees. 40% of refugees are under the age of 18, and in normal times, more than half are out of school. With the added challenge of COVID-19, even more refugees run the risk of missing out on school. According to the United Nations, the COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption of education systems in history, affecting nearly 1.6 billion learners in more than 190 countries. Closures of schools and other learning spaces have impacted 94% of the world's student population. Refugees are among those at highest risk of being left behind. Already disproportionately impacted by their circumstances, refugee children risk being further marginalized as they miss out on support services offered through schools, such as school meals and psychosocial support programs. When offered, distance learning also requires access to the internet, technology, and stable electricity, which many refugees simply don't have. With coping mechanisms like child labor and early marriage on the rise, the risk of students dropping out of school is significant. Despite these challenges, organizations like JRS are responding and adapting our programs to continue to educate children during the pandemic. In a publication released last month, we outlined 3 guiding principles for adapting our education programs: protecting the health of students and staff, ensuring learning continues, and providing protection and emotional support to students and teachers. As many around the world prepare for the start of a new school year, the return to school will look very different. Today, we're happy to have with us colleagues from around the world, as well as our partners at the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, INEE, to discuss how organizations serving refugees have adapted to COVID-19 and what the new school year will look like for school-aged refugees. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. The conversation today is being streamed on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. It will also be recorded for future viewing and sharing. We'll also have time at the end for Q&A, so feel free to send any questions you have on whichever platform you're tuned into. Or you can send an email to communications@jrsusa.org. And let us know that you're tuned in by using hashtag protecting the future. One word, that's the hashtag protecting the future. Now, to get us started, we have our first speaker. I'm thrilled to welcome Sarah Montgomery. She is the coordinator for knowledge management at INEE. Sarah is responsible for the knowledge management of INEE resources and tools and is INEE's COVID-19 focal point. She received her master's in public administration and development practice with a focus in education from Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, and a BS in anthropology from Santa Clara University. She has over 7 years of experience in education in schools, community-based organizations, and nonprofits that focus on girls, monitoring and evaluation, and crisis contexts in Kenya, Tanzania, India, Ghana, and even New York City. Sarah will discuss how the global education in emergencies community is adapting to this new reality and how INEE is working with its partners to prepare for the new school year. Thank you again, Sarah, for joining us today.
Thanks, Julia. And thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to talk a little bit about what INEE is, what we do, and how we've adapted to working in a COVID-19 world, as well as take a step back and build on what Julia mentioned and look at how COVID-19 has affected the EIE sector. Oh, there we go, great. So INEE began in 2000. It's an open global member-based organization of UN agencies, NGOs, including JRS, donors, governments, and individuals from all across the globe. We have 17,000 members and partner organizations in 190 countries. And we exist because of our members and for our members. If you are not a member, it's free and easy to join. You can go to our website, which will be shown on the last slide. Go to the next slide. Great. So little bit of an overview on how COVID has affected specifically crisis-affected contexts. So this diagram is from the Global Education Cluster, one of our partners. And it really focuses on the 27 countries with an activated global education cluster. And so these are the key crisis-affected contexts where prior to COVID, access to and the provision of education was challenging. So you can see the numbers there, and if you go to the cluster website, you can further explore the data on a more country level. Next slide. So I wanted to chat a little bit about the key challenges and considerations. Julia mentioned some of these, but these are ones that INEE is also really prioritizing and working with and towards. The first one is to prioritize well-being, and this includes yourselves on this webinar, staff, teachers, caregivers, and learners. And this includes physical and mental health, and this is particularly important for those living in crisis-affected contexts. Distance education, distance learning has become one of the key components of providing education during COVID. And as Julia mentioned, this is especially challenging for those living in crisis-affected contexts due to additional barriers to access, including limited capacity of caregivers to support at home, teachers' access to trainings, and the biggest one is just access to connectivity, whether that's internet, cell service, or devices. So because of this, interactive radio instruction programs have become more common, particularly building on the Ebola crisis. And INEE has conducted a mapping of what distance education resources are available, because there are thousands, but a lot of them require technology and access to internet. And so we were really looking at what is available for low resource, low tech organizations. So building on that, we're going to be developing a network space to continue this work, and that will include providing support to our members, EIE practitioners, to continue and build upon various programming around distance education. Distance education particularly hinders learners who are differently abled. It also disproportionately affects girls. A recent report by the UN Girls Education Initiative reported that they're expecting a significant drop in the number of girls enrolled in school once schools do reopen. And this challenge is also existing with distance education modalities. So really ensuring that there's the protection there for all learners. And related to that is the connection with other sectors. So health, child protection, mental health, psychosocial support are really vital to ensuring the well-being of learners and teachers. And last, as we are all probably aware, funding is always a challenge, particularly in crisis-affected contexts. But because of the changes to education systems, as we know, has really highlighted this discrepancy. And so we're calling on donors to provide more flexible funding and adapt, but also provide additional funding to organizations to help support adapting their programs. Next slide. So I want to highlight a few resources. Got a little bit out of order, but I can jump into our key one, which is the technical note that we developed, which is aligned to the INEE minimum standards. And that is our key kind of guiding document for a lot of what INEE does. And so we wanted to make sure anything we produce really supports and accompanies that. So this is very much a living document. It's not exhaustive, it's not prescriptive, but we really wanted to support EIE practitioners from a variety of experience levels, particularly those in crisis-affected or fragile contexts. And this focuses on the acute phase of a response. And so it is organized into 5 different sections. You'll see the first one, as I mentioned earlier, is taking care of yourselves. It talks about coordinating your work, analyzing the context you're working in, because we're all working in a slightly different context, developing your activity plan, and then continuing to review the progress. We are developing accompanying thematic technical guidance to go along with this technical note, the first of which will be around measurement and monitoring and evaluation, and how you can adapt your M&E programs to work with particularly distance education. Future guidance will be around psychosocial support and teachers and a few others. And you can access this on the INE website. Next slide. So a few other pieces of INE's response. To highlight, I want to flag that all of these are targeted towards those living or working in crisis-affected contexts. Many of what we share is applicable across the globe, but we really wanted to ensure that we provided support to our members. And all of these actions are available in the 5 INE working languages, which are Arabic, English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. So the first action we took was really supporting in the curation of resources. There's an overwhelming number of very valuable resources available, and we wanted to support our members by organizing and doing some review to ensure that they're very applicable to the provision of education in crisis-affected contexts. And we've done that around organizing them around thematic topics from accelerated education, return to school, distance education, support for caregivers and teachers. We've also conducted webinar series, and that is ongoing. We've conducted 19 so far in 4 languages, and we have 3 upcoming. So if you would like to register for those, you can visit our website, which I'll show at the end. All recordings and presentations are also available if you're not able to attend. We're beginning to introduce a more interactive model as we learn that this response is going to be kind of long-term, to ensure that our webinars are more engaging, and it can kind of be a two-way discussion so that it's really tangible for our members. Our blog series is really to capture case studies and lessons learned as we go through this crisis, to be kind of an ongoing way that our members can share how they've used, whether it's INE resources or other resources, how they've adapted their work in light of COVID. And you can also sign up to receive a newsletter that kind of encompasses all of INE's various response, as well as share from partner organizations such as JRS. Next slide. So the last 3 pieces I wanted to talk about are 3 other products that INE has developed. The first is a policy paper that we developed in conjunction with the Alliance for Protection in Humanitarian Action. And it's a guide for decision makers, policymakers, to really think through the process for school closure and or reopening. And we really wanted to ensure that it weighs the risks to children and youth being either in school or out of school, and really prioritize the best interest of the child. The next 2 advocacy pieces were developed. The first was for governments, donors, practitioners to influence policy dialogue and discussions to ensure that its education is safe, equitable, inclusive for all children in crisis contexts during this pandemic. And the last is an advocacy brief that highlights how we can mitigate the impact of school closures and ensure learners keep learning during COVID-19. It's a focus, again, on students and learners who are already living in crisis and conflict contexts. Next slide. So that kind of encompasses what INE has been doing, and a little bit of a brief overview of how COVID has affected the EI sector. For more information on any of that, you can visit our website or email us, and we're happy to help you out. Oh, Julie, I can't hear you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks so much, Sarah. We at JRS are really proud to be partners of INE. I know a lot of other organizations that work with you are proud to be partners, and you have a ton of resources and are doing a lot of great work. So for folks that are watching right now, think about any questions you might have for Sarah once we get to our Q&A, digging a little deeper maybe on any of the resources that she outlined. But I know that many of us have been taking advantage of those fantastic resources to help inform our work. So thanks again for being with us. Now I'd like to introduce Greg St Arnold. Greg is a colleague and also the director of the Education Technical Unit at JRS International. Greg previously served as Education in Emergencies Specialist within the JRS International Office and Regional Education Coordinator for JRS in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa. His areas of focus include teaching and learning and education for people with disabilities. Before joining JRS, Greg was a middle school teacher for 8 years. He holds degrees from Marquette University and Arizona State University. So Greg will provide us with a bit of an overview of JRS's global education programs and the types of interventions that JRS is employing during our COVID-19 response. So thanks so much, Greg, for being with us.
Thank you, Julia. And let me just echo a huge thanks to Sarah and everybody else at the INEE Secretariat who's been so pivotal in organizing information and getting helpful resources out these last 6 months. So, and I'm going to just talk about that briefly in a few moments. But I think I'll start by just giving kind of a broad overview of what JRS's education projects look like globally. And then I'll talk a little bit about what the COVID response looked like, and just give a few minor points about that, because I think Roy is going to speak a bit more and Nicole later on. And then I'll talk a little bit about those guiding principles that Julia mentioned at the beginning. You know, the impact of COVID-19 wasn't really felt or realized widely until about mid-March. Of course, there were outbreaks elsewhere before then, but it hadn't really touched places where we were operating. And so up until March, we were largely focused on implementing our education activities as we had planned for 2020. So what that looked like was we were operating in 2020 75 dedicated formal and non-formal education activities in 24 countries, from Southeast Asia to the Middle East to Africa. And within those 75 projects, that included managing networks of formal schools in camp settings, such as in Eastern Chad, Burundi, and Malawi. It also included running non-formal learning centers in places like Kakuma, Kenya, in Lebanon, Iraq, and India. And it also included teacher professional development programs in Thailand, Myanmar, Syria, South Sudan, and other places. Approximately 195,000 students were being served in pre-primary, primary, and secondary projects. In addition, over 50,000 additional learners were engaged in adult education and post-secondary education programs, and over 50,000 more in vocational training or livelihood training programs. In addition, in over a dozen countries, mostly in Europe and Latin America, JRS was also working inside schools, doing supplemental programming such as raising awareness about the rights of migrants and refugees. So, you know, in all, over 300,000 students globally were affected just within JRS projects by COVID and the closures of schools and training facilities. So it was a huge impact on what we were doing everywhere. And it happened quite suddenly. So with such a wide range of education activities and such broad geographic scope, the initial responses were not at all coordinated centrally, or it was very localized. And it was tailored to what was happening in each particular country. Some countries closed their schools quite suddenly, some did it a bit more gradually. So in places where the school closures happened quite suddenly in March, the immediate focus was how to stay connected to students and families. And in Lebanon, JRS teams made use of WhatsApp for communication. And also they quickly developed mini lessons and actually moved their instruction to through WhatsApp and found that as a way to keep in contact with people. It happened quite rapidly. Roy's going to talk about that a little bit more, so I won't say too much about that. In some other places where mobile devices were less widespread or connectivity was less widespread, outreach was done to students and families through home visits by teachers and by other JRS staff, such as social workers. A few places that implemented this type of outreach include Cameroon, Congo, and Chad. And of course, this required training teachers and staff on COVID prevention and awareness, and also equipping them with personal protective equipment so that they were not in fact spreading COVID or posing risks by doing this type of outreach. But it was very important to continue that link, to maintain that link in places where the closures happened suddenly and there was just a lot of confusion about what was going on. Education and schooling really provides an essential link. And so it was felt that even though there is some risk in doing these kinds of outreach activities, it was necessary to get the message out. In the first month of school closures, several projects were able to use available technology to both adapt instruction and also to continue spreading awareness and prevention messages. In Central African Republic and Uganda, radio was used to deliver child-focused and family-focused programming, which focused on both psychosocial care and support topics and learning topics. In Malawi, radio was also used to provide exam prep sessions for students who were taking end-of-year exams in Standard 8 or Upper Primary 8 and Standard 4. In Thailand, teacher professional development was continued through emailed modules as well as a weekly conference call. And in Myanmar, teacher trainers actually video recorded themselves and distributed laptops and projectors to remote schools so teachers could continue on with their professional development sessions, but do it in a socially distanced way. In terms of our post-secondary education projects, some of these were already being conducted online, but in places like Kenya and Malawi, a process was developed for students to be able to check out laptop computers and other technology so that they could continue their studies from home rather than having to come to computer centers or learning centers that had to be closed due to COVID prevention. So this is just a short list of all the different activities that teams developed in response to the immediate challenges. While this rapid adaptation and innovation was going on, we were also doing our best at a global level to monitor and support these responses for a couple reasons. We wanted to share lessons learned and connect staff who are working on different projects and in different countries so that they could talk about what was working, what wasn't working. They could share ideas and build off one another. We also wanted to ensure the effectiveness and the appropriateness of the response as much as we could. And so we did this through a couple means. We, first of all, had weekly coordination calls with our regional education specialists. And this includes Roy and Nicole, who are joining us today. And we started to compile what was happening in all these different places, what the response looked like, what were some of the challenges that were being encountered, what was further needed in terms of resources or guidance or materials. And we tried to make note of some of the trends. And as we did this informed the development of a COVID education response plan, which has helped us organize and make sense of all the different moving pieces that are happening right now. So we drew pretty extensively on external sources, and we drew on the activities that were ongoing at the field level to really put together a plan based around these three principles that Julia mentioned: protecting the health of students and teachers, ensuring that learning continued, and providing protection and emotional support to students and teachers. For each of these three principles, we identified key actions to be taken, and we included specific guidance guidance notes, and resources, as well as examples of where this was being done within the JRS network. And this is where the INEE website's COVID-19 resource page has been extremely helpful. It was a clearinghouse organized by theme, so we could go through and identify resources from many different agencies, especially a lot of guidance that was done in response to the Ebola virus outbreak of 2015 in West Africa. And there were also several resources that had been developed in Asia in response to infectious disease outbreaks in the 2000s and 2010s. So really being able to plug into the INEE network and leverage all of that information, all those resources, and to find ways to funnel them to our teams so that it could inform their response was really a crucial part of what we did at the global level. So now as we start to move to a different phase in some places of the COVID reality, which includes the gradual reopening of schools and resumption of classes, we're also using these three principles to really guide us through these next phases and to think about what is adapting existing programs to the COVID reality? What does recovering from the COVID reality look like? How do we ensure that learning continues in this new phase where we might be seeing more dropouts, where we might see people falling behind because of lost learning time? And how do we even look further ahead and build resilience within our system so that when we experience this type of outbreak or pandemic in the future, we're better prepared for it? That's really been kind of where we're focusing at the global level. But as I mentioned, it's all kind of informed by this adaptation and innovation and response that's been happening throughout the JRS network at the project level. So I will turn it back over to you, Julia, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from Roy and Nicole and others about what it really has looked like in these specific locations.
Great, thanks so much, Greg. I think your point about this sort of compounded nature of challenges. So not only were we, like other organizations, scrambling to adapt our programming once COVID hit, but now we are dealing with some of the after effects, the ongoing after effects, these sort of coping mechanisms that we mentioned, if it's child labor, early marriage, or dropping out of school entirely for those reasons. So it's this compounded nature of the challenges that we are really trying to respond to. So I think that's a key point to flag. And thanks again for the global overview. And we'll pivot now to a more specific context and an example of how JRS is implementing some of these changes. I'm really happy to welcome our colleague Roy Gabriel, our Regional Education Officer for JRS in the Middle East. I know it's late in Beirut, Roy, so thank you so much for staying at the office late and being with us today. Roy started working with JRS as a peace education teacher and school administrator in Beirut before moving to the JRS Lebanon country office in 2015, and then to the JRS Middle East regional office in 2016. Roy has an academic background in anthropology, media and communication sciences, and humanitarian assistance. Roy will tell us how COVID-19 has impacted JRS's efforts to provide access to education for refugees in Lebanon. And we know, Roy, that not only with COVID-19, but with last month's destructive explosion, that there has been a lot that you and your colleagues and our refugees that we are working with in Lebanon have been dealing with. So thanks again for being with us, and we look forward to hearing more.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you, everyone. Before going into the details of the JRS Lebanon response to the COVID-19 crisis, I would like to draw very briefly the bigger picture of how Lebanon looks like today. At first, I would like to talk about the very deep economic and financial crisis that has been growing over the past few years, and that exploded in October 2019. As a result, so many people lost their jobs. People don't have proper access to their money and their bank accounts. We are struggling with hyperinflation. 55% of Lebanese people have fallen below the poverty line. 23% are now considered extremely poor compared to 8% last year. So the situation, the bigger picture is not bright at all. It's very challenging. And as a result of this economic crisis, we saw in many of our projects, or all our projects, especially among refugees, that the rate of dropouts increased, and that was crazy, especially among boys who have been forced to drop out so they can support their families financially. So the fathers either lost their jobs or they are not getting enough money as they used to get before. So, and then the COVID-19 crisis happened, and it increased the pressure on the different sectors, hospitals, of course, but also education. The daily cases jumped from around 50, between 50 and 60 a few weeks ago to more than 650 in the past couple of weeks. One of the results of this is, of course, like the pressure on the health sector is becoming more and more alarming, and also the education sector. Many private schools are closing now, which is a challenge, a crisis in itself, but it's also more pressure on the public sector, which is already struggling with a morning and afternoon shift and the limited resources. And then the Beirut explosion happened, as you said, Julia, and on the 4th of August. So around 200 deaths and more than 6,500 injured, and around 300,000 homeless people. And this also affected many schools, more than 150 schools. Most of them are public schools. So it affected around 85,000 children. The estimated cost of rehabilitation, according to the Ministry of Education, is around $22 million. So this is the biggest picture. This is only to tell that Lebanese people and also refugees in Lebanon are exhausted, both physically and psychologically. And in this picture, I would like to describe what JRS Lebanon, how JRS Lebanon responded to the COVID-19 crisis. So I will do that chronologically, and this will be very simple. And then I will talk about the challenges and the lessons learned. First, it was very difficult for us. So it was towards the end of February. We didn't know how to proceed. We didn't know how long the crisis will be. The uncertainty was covering everything, not only education, not only our projects. We were trying to figure out and plan for the future. The guidance was not also very clear. So even the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Interior, they were also not clear about what we should be doing in the country. And I think this is not specific to Lebanon. So we suspended our program, and that was based on the instructions and the recommendations of the Ministry of Education. As I said, it took us some time, but then we, as Greg was also saying, we opened WhatsApp groups for each of our classes. So for each class, we had one WhatsApp group. The administrator was the school principal. So between 70 and 80% of our children joined these groups, and among them, 80 to 90% they maintained attendance. By that I mean they were present in the group, they stayed in the WhatsApp groups, and they were actively participating. And our teachers, they started sending lessons to like the second week of March. And these lessons were video messages, so teachers filming themselves explaining the lesson. At the same time, they were sending with the video messages, they were also sending text messages and text documents, and also audio messages for the families who are not able to download the video messages. The schedules were a bit different from a project to another. We were opening the school, the WhatsApp groups between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. And we were sending 2 or 3 video messages and text messages and audio messages per day. Children were also expected to work to do some activities, to do some projects, and they were sending all these like exercises, activities, projects to their teachers for feedback. And that was also one of the challenges that is linked to the nature of the application. We also created for each class, we created a second WhatsApp group that was managed by the school principal and the social worker, and they were sending many documents, many video messages also about the crisis, how to protect ourselves, also some psychosocial support materials to support the parents and the children as well. And they kept also working with the children and the parents that were previously referred to the MHPSS Mental Health and Psychosocial Support project. As for the academic plan, it was completely changed based also on the recommendation of the Ministry of Education. So we did not stop in June as we used to do usually. We continued through summer. We added much more like games and activities to our schedule, to our materials that we were sharing with the children. And we continued through summer. That was the recommendation of the Ministry of Education, who asked all NGOs to make sure that the children are ready for the upcoming school year. So this is what we did. In terms of challenges, as I mentioned, uncertainty, the lack of like a very clear guidance or policy at the national level, how we should move from the traditional, from the classical way of teaching to the online one. The second challenge, which we struggled a lot with this, is especially at the beginning of the crisis. Some parents, and this is not limited to refugees, are not convinced with distance learning, and so for them, they don't see the value, they don't see the importance of that. So they were leaving the groups right away. That required like a lot of efforts, especially from our school principals and school administrators and education officers. They were calling the parents and they try to have this conversation with them to tell them that this is the reality now. We should adapt to that. We are doing whatever we can, the best we can, just to make sure that we are accompanying your child, etc. So that was the second challenge: how parents were not convinced. The third one is the lack of devices. So in the families, the parents sometimes the father who has the mobile phone, sometimes he leaves the house to try to find a work or to work or something like that. So, and this is the time where we do the classes. So that was a challenge. Also, families who have more than one child in the school or education project, and that was also a challenge. So they all have to get the material, to do their homework, etc. The fourth challenge was internet connectivity. This is very obvious. I'm not going to explain that to talk about it much. So lack of access and data consumption. And also, I would like to talk about the limitations of WhatsApp as an application. It's not ideal. It's not the best. But using a different platform would have created much more challenges. So even with WhatsApp, we were struggling a lot, and especially the parents were struggling a lot, and the children to use the application and the device. So moving to a different platform would have been more challenging. There was also the challenge of monitoring and evaluation. What does that mean now? What is attendance? What is maintaining attendance? What is a successful completion? Which leads us also to the challenge, to the question of assessment. How do we do a proper assessment? These are the questions we constantly get from the teachers, from the education coordinators. So all these also, like the question of MND, the question of assessment was also took also a very big space of our reflection all these months. Especially that we have more than one community-based early child education. It's a non-formal education program for children, for refugee children who are 5 years old, to prepare them for grade 1 in public schools. So the Minister of Education was asking for an evidence of learning, so they can give the certificate that the children need, so they can enroll in grade 1 public schools. So that was not clear. What does that mean? What is that evidence? What the nature of that evidence? So this was also something we were asking ourselves. And the end, it's also the beginning, is something Sarah talked about, is the well-being of teachers, not only teachers, I would say. I heard many teachers saying that they feel very lonely. They are alone at home. They are not used, and this is not humane. I admit. So working with a cell phone the whole day, first to respond to the questions of the questions of the students and the parents, and also to get all the photos, so all the homework or projects or activities, and then to provide the feedback, etc. That was very challenging for the teachers. And I will add to that also that many of our teachers, especially in Beirut, were victims of the explosion that happened, and they lost their apartments or something, or they lost someone like a relative, or so it was not easy at all. And the question of well-being is central. And I will start with lessons learned. Now I will move a bit to lessons learned. I will start with that. So the well-being of teachers, to say that teachers, they need continuous support even if they don't ask for it. This is something very important. So this should be very systematic. This should be constant. So even if they don't ask for the support, we should be there. And I'm not only talking about weekly, like structured meetings. These are things we are still doing online, of course. I'm talking about like random calls, random for like the education officer, the education coordinator, the school principal, calling randomly the teachers just to check how they are, not to talk about work sometimes. This is very important. Also, we sometimes we celebrate the retention rates we have in our WhatsApp group. So as I mentioned before, we had really good numbers, but these are not good numbers for me because it's not. Some children, they want to, they can access school, they want to go to school, but because of this challenge, like the online, the distance learning, the use of WhatsApp, etc., they are not able to access the program. This is something that require, I think, continuous follow up and support with the parents to see how we can solve all these problems. So this is just to say that I'm telling myself all the time I should not celebrate the numbers we have and the retention rates we have. Also supporting parents. This is a plan we have for the upcoming school year. We'll be supporting families with data bundles and plans to govern the data consumption. Even the families who are still in the groups, they are struggling with that. So this is something we will be providing as JRS. We also noticed that it's very important to distribute booklets and exercises, activities to children, and to link that to the WhatsApp messages, so the video messages and the text messages and also the audio messages. So this is important for the parents because they need to see booklets and things like that. This is something important for them to understand what we are doing. And also it's important for us in terms of assessment, in terms we are doing assessment as I said every week, but also this is a good tool for us. And I will finish with a point. So some children are, we realize that some children are more engaged and they are more active, they are more punctual in submitting their like assignments and homework, etc., compared to when they were in the school. So this is something also we saw in all our projects, and it put some question marks.
We may have lost Roy, or at least his internet maybe giving him problems. So I know that Roy was wrapping up, so I will just pivot and thank him, and hopefully he'll be able to rejoin, especially for the Q&A, but want to thank Roy for that really helpful example of Lebanon and what's been happening in Lebanon with those specific details, I think giving us a sense of how JRS in Lebanon has been able to actualize some of the programming that that we've been developing in response to COVID-19. So thank you for those examples, Roy. And if anyone has specific questions, please again put them in the comment section on whichever platform we're using, and hopefully Roy will rejoin us and be able to answer some of those questions. So now I'd like to finally welcome our Our last participant, Nicole Teta. Nicole is JRS's Interregional Education Coordinator for the West Africa and Great Lakes region, covering Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, Central African Republic, DRC, Burundi, and Tanzania. And in this role, she assists and supervises education projects by providing team support, monitoring, teacher training, and capacity building activities. So another wonderful member of our team. She is with us today to introduce a brief video featuring JRS's work in Central African Republic. So thank you, Nicole, for being with us. Feel free to go ahead. Audio challenges earlier. Nicole, can you hear us? All right, so I am just going to step in for Nicole. She actually shared with me the introduction that she had prepared for the video, so I'll go ahead and read that on her behalf. We thought she might run into some technical difficulties, but in the video that we're about to watch, a 12-year-old girl, Mirabelle Katura, shares her experience both as radio producer and a listener of the School on the Radio. Mirabelle has participated in the recording of the radio courses of this educational program produced by JRS Central African Republic in partnership with Education Cannot Wait. The program is for preschool and primary students. It's broadcast by a community radio in Bambari every day from 4:30 to 5 p.m. And over 2,000 children within 50 kilometers listen to the program. Parents also listen as it helps them to monitor their kids' learning. The School on the Radio started in June 2020 as a response to the closure of schools due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Children hadn't been able to go to school since March 2020. Therefore, JRS had to find an alternative way adapted to the context to continue offering education and social accompaniment to the children we serve. It's important to mention that many of them have been forcibly displaced with their families within the country due to violence. Many live in areas difficult to reach and with no access to technology, even to a radio. That's why JRS is also working with focal points within the communities. They offered radios to some of them so they can gather children in the village to listen to the program. The fact that the children themselves are participating in the recording of the classes has been quite innovative and very celebrated by students and parents, as they say the program is more compelling for the young ones. Thank you for the opportunity to share this video of Mirabelle.
Je m'appelle Mirabelle Ketela. J'ai 12 ans. Je suis centrafricaine. J'habite le quartier Saint-Joseph à Bombari et élève en classe de CM1. J'étais mécontente de la fermeture des écoles à cause du coronavirus. J'avais accueilli le programme à la radio avec beaucoup de joie et de satisfaction. J'avais appris l'origine de la maladie à COVID-19 sans évolution, les préventions, les modes de transmission et les précautions avec des leçons de français et d'éducation pour la santé. Tout le programme était très intéressant et éducatif. La radio a favorisé les causes, les clubs d'écoute dans les quartiers. Je participais au cours à l'enregistrement des leçons. J'étais très fière de me faire écouter par les autres.
A huge thank you to our colleagues in West Africa and the Central African Republic for preparing the video. I'm sorry again, Nicole, you weren't able to introduce it yourself, but we're also really thankful to Education Cannot Wait for helping to support this program. ECW is the first global fund for education in emergencies, and they committed $60 million in 33 countries, including Central African Republic, as part of their COVID-19 response efforts. You can help replenish ECW's Emergency Response Fund by reaching out to your own policymakers here in the US, if you're here in the US, urging them to support additional contributions to this important effort. Take action by sending a letter to your policymaker today, and we'll post a link Now we have a few minutes set aside for Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, please use whichever platform you're tuned into or send an email to communications@jrsusa.org. We do have a couple of questions from our audience. The first one is whether or not the JRS guidance notes are available to other agencies. And this may refer to the INEE guidance notes, Sarah, that you mentioned earlier. This is from Jennifer on Facebook. So Sarah and maybe Greg, if either or both of you could maybe address that.
I can go first. All the INEE resources that we've developed and that are also shared on our website are available for any organization to access and use and share. So yes, if you're having trouble accessing it, feel free to get in touch with us.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, the INEE technical note is a great resource. We also, I think there's been shared a link to the Protecting the Future paper that we developed, which kind of summarizes the principles of the JRS response and gives some snapshots of Myanmar and Lebanon and Central African Republic and what it's looked like in those specific places, and has some key lessons learned as well. And so that's available on the JRS USA website, and then probably the link has been posted in the chat. We also have some more technical guidance notes that we've developed, which really the key word that's been used is curation. When we really heard from our teams about what they needed in the field, it was very specific guidance. And so, our role at the global level, at the regional level, has really been to try and look at the wider set of resources and extract what is most relevant for people in the field and try to distill that down. So we have done that, and I'm happy to share those resources if you'd like to see it. I mean, a lot of it is just curation and compilation of other work that's been done over the years and adding in maybe some specific technical notes. But if you would be interested in seeing that, just send an email to communications@jrsusa.org and we can connect on that.
Great, thank you both. And I know we have Nicole, I think, and Roy's back. So this question, I think either or both of you, great, will be able to join this. So this is from Tom via email. Was JRS able to do anything in any locations to make distance learning accessible for children with disabilities? So for children with disabilities in particular, I know that's a significant challenge on top of all of the other barriers that we discussed. I don't know, Roy, maybe Nicole, being in the field, if either or both of you have something to say on that front. Maybe Nicole, if you are able to speak, we can let you go first.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry for the trouble of the internet here. Yes, to respond to Tom, I think that JRS can do distance learning for people in disability, but in the same time, it depends of which kind of disability, because it's very, very large. Like for the radio program that we did in CAR and some we did actually in Cameroon too, we can reach some of our children who was with disability. It wasn't for sure for children, who are blind, but at the same time, the kind of children that we reach was the children who can actually come or access to the education to school. And so we accompany them because we have some focal point as well over there, and we help them with the remote educational that we provide. So for sure, the radio for me it's one of the technology that can help these children. And in the same time, we can, when we talk about education or this education, we have so much distance education, even like just paper and some small group classroom in distance. It can be very, very useful for children with disability. So yes, for me, it's a
Thank you, Nicole. I don't know, Roy, if you have anything to add?
I don't have anything to add. So it depends on the type of disability, as Nicole was saying. What we were doing in the past few months was not outreach. We were completing the school year. So
if anyone else wants to have any final comments on that question.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could just add, in Thailand, the JRS Thailand project in Mae Hong Son, working along the border with Myanmar, they went to a model of self-learning and then periodic visits once or twice a week from a teacher in small groups. And that was one way in which they were able to ensure that all students who were homebound, but also students with disabilities, were able to continue receiving education. And so we did find a good number of resources to support that home-based, self-paced learning on the INEE COVID-19 webpage. And so that's another way, and it's a no-tech way, and in fact, that has been very useful in that environment where technology and electricity are not very easily accessible.
Thanks, Greg.
And to jump off of Greg's point, we have a list of called Inclusion on our website of resources, and Humanity and Inclusion has a set of 5 briefs at this point, focusing around ensuring that TV, radio, home learning, distance education is inclusive for all learners, and they include ways to adapt various modalities to be inclusive of students with disabilities.
Great, thank you all. I think we have time for one last question. This is from Kathleen on Facebook. How are organizations working with local governments to make sure that a return to school for refugees is both equitable and safe? So are there been any interaction either that JRS has had on the ground, or Sarah, that you are aware of among your partners, or guidance in terms of how to develop those return to school programs, or making those, you mentioned the policy paper, Sarah, about that decision-making process, but how is that going in terms of working with local governments?
Yeah, I can speak on the policy paper quickly. We developed it kind of a little bit more general so that governments can adapt it to their context, because each government is at a slightly different stage. And so the idea is, though, it's targeted to policymakers, decision makers, to decide if and when it is safe to open schools, with the overarching goal of ensuring that it's safe for children, and balancing the safety of being out of school versus safety of being in school. So I haven't heard specific cases on it yet. We're still gathering feedback on its use, but that from our end is the kind of the guidance around ensuring that relationship with local governments.
Right. Does anyone else want to chime in terms of working with local governments?
Maybe I can just say broadly, I think the responses have been most informed at the country level through engagement with work groups and local coordinating bodies. And maybe Nicole wanted to say something about that, so I'll turn it over to her.
Nicole,
okay, thank you, Greg. I will say that we are, I will say an obligation, is kind of obligation to work with the local government. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh. Oh, okay, great. I was saying that it's an obligation to work with local government, just even like the inspector, the academic member of the Ministry of Education. Why? Because, in terms for the COVID-19, actually, even for the distance learning, we have to work with them to validate the curriculum the program that we need to do through the radio. So all the course was validated by them. Otherwise, you can, and all the NGO can come and do whatever I will say they want as a curriculum. So we have to take the local government curriculum, even the national government curriculum, and then to make sure that someone from the government is aware on that project, is aware on the program, and ensure validate the course. So for me, it's an obligation.
Thank you, Nicole. So yes, absolutely. Working with the local government, it sounds like is an obligation in your words, and critical in terms of making sure that that the curriculum syncs up with what they have planned as well, and that there's an open line of communication. So thank you, Nicole. I know we are at the hour now. Thanks again to everyone joining us today. A special thank you to all of our speakers. We hope you can all stay involved by learning more about these issues and by taking action. Please consider visiting our website at www.jrsusa.org/protecting the future for more information about education for refugees in the time of COVID. Consider sending a letter to your policymakers, asking them to support ECW. Feel free to visit INEE's website for more resources, and we look forward to staying in touch. Thank you all again.